For as straightforward of a conceit as the Evil Dead franchise has traded on for over 40 years, read from the cursed book, Awaken the Vengeful Deadites, it's always been something of a magic trick to watch how far each movie can push that conceit while still remaining true to the creative spirit of Sam Raimi's 1981 original. Raimi's sequels set some very loose boundaries in that regard, but Fede Alvarez and Lee Cronin's later takes each found varying degrees of success adapting the story into a more modern cinematic context. By comparison, Evil Dead Burn, helmed by French director Sébastien Vaniček, doesn't meaningfully add to the conversation. I'm Tom Jorgensen, and this is my review of Evil Dead Burn.
To your perfect family. Cheers.
An extended prologue sets Evil Dead Burn squarely in the aftermath of the events of Evil Dead Rise, as a couple of unlucky fishermen find out what happens to those who indulge in outdoor recreation while Deadites are on the prowl. From there, Burn catches up with a completely new set of characters, led by Alice, a French expat grappling with not just the recent death of her abusive husband Will Price, but a set of in-laws who are struggling to find a way forward through all of that grief. Once the Prices hunker down at the family farm, their connection to the fated Necronomicon comes into focus, and if you can believe it, they come under assault by Deadites who are out to recover an artifact in the family's possession. Once the action moves to the farm, Evil Dead Burn closely adheres to the familiar Dead by Dawn structure favored by its forerunners. Organizing the Deadite action that's to follow around Alice's inner turmoil is a good instinct, but it's one that Fede Alvarez's Evil Dead reboot, the movie that Burn most closely aligns with tonally, found much more success in mining. Externalizing how Mia's drug addiction was destroying herself and her loved ones in the form of the Deadites, a level of thematic specificity that Raimi never really had much interest in mining with the creatures, led to a strong connection between the horrific violence in that movie and its main character's arc, each benefiting in turn. Evil Dead Rise's Beth learns that she's pregnant in the opening scene and immediately has the associated anxiety attacking her in the most closely analogous way possible for her, through her single mom sister and her kids. Here, Alice is contending with similarly weighty issues in the aftermath of a terrible marriage, but Evil Dead Burn's attempts to structure itself around how that complicates Alice's grief tend to ring hollow. Vaniček and co-writer Florent Bernard's script routinely shortchanges and obscures the character's personality, giving Suilia Rakub very little room to build Alice into more than just a cipher for those in abusive situations. And I know what you're probably thinking, it's an Evil Dead movie, like why are they going to so much trouble to have the main character have a story? It's kind of the entire key to horror these days, is making sure that you're bought into the main character's plight and emotionally there with them throughout. And it's not that, obviously the Evil Dead movies, the original trilogy, they kind of skip past that, but they seem to make a very pointed choice to do that. Whereas the more recent Evil Dead movies have much more thematically heavy things on their minds. And I really think that the first two modern Evil Deads do a much better job of coalescing that into a good story for the main character. Evil Dead Burn, a little rougher on that score.
Don't worry. You're safe here.
Overwrought stylistic choices further hamper the cohesion between Evil Dead Burn's action and thematic efforts. Not only do cutaways to a fight that Alice and Will had really stretch to explain why burning and fire become such common motifs in the story as it goes along, but brief though they are, these jumps out of the confines of the action at the Price farm hurt the momentum of the Deadites' onslaught. It may sound like a minor thing, but it is emblematic of other ways that Vaniček bumps against other just as important pillars of the franchise. The Price family falls neatly into horror archetypes. Will's brother Joseph is a struggling author and serves as Burn's primary vehicle for delivering Necronomicon-sourced information. There's also uptight mom Susan, emotionally repressed and explosively angry dad Edgar, and cognitively declining yet at times spookily lucid grandma Polly. Archetypes can be a very useful tool for keeping a story moving, but in an Evil Dead movie, the Deadites are usually more unsettling when they're playing against their victim's personality. So Evil Dead Burn's supernaturally fueled heightening of the Price's character flaws feels a little rote as a result.
Remember, he's down below.
But amid all the disgusting Deadite mayhem, and there is a lot of it, An Evil Dead film usually leaves room for a couple laughs. The franchise has always had a particularly complicated relationship to comedy, since Evil Dead 2 eschewed the original's intensity with its more mischievous pitch and redefined horror comedies forever in 1987. Evil Dead Burn does make occasional overtures towards dark humor, particularly through Grandma Polly, who functions here a little like Henrietta in Evil Dead 2.
Can you look under the bed? Daddy always checks to make sure there aren't any monsters.
But Vaniček doesn't have a great handle on when or how to break the tension by leaning into laughs, especially given the dark subject matter that Alice is contending with. Like, for instance, there's one moment where a Deadite is trying to convince Polly that there's a thief in the house with what amounts to a very conversational sounding, oh yeah, there's definitely a thief in the house. It pushes the Deadites a little too far into broad comedy. Vaniček shows an unmistakable preference for shocking grotesquerie throughout Evil Dead Burn, and on that count, he does not disappoint. Vaniček is particularly good at staging moments of Deadite action in close quarters, especially during one early sequence set in a car attempting to leave the property, which, if you've ever seen an Evil Dead movie, never goes great. Once all hell breaks loose, every moment is a fight for survival that turns a different part of the car into a weapon. Vaniček can scarcely contain his excitement to get from one gory gag to the next, littering early scenes at the Price farm with loudly telegraphed setups, establishing all the pokey stabby stuff bound to be used to pokey stabby ends later on. Once it comes time for those dominoes to fall, Vaniček seldom resists pushing the metaphorical and often literal knife in one or two extra times, even in moments where some could argue he takes it too far. Burn's chaotic carnage does get a little exhausting in the home stretch, especially by the end of a climax that feels too close to that of Alvarez's Evil Dead reboot to create any room for an original feeling final confrontation. The special effects serving those efforts come out of this somewhat scattershot experience completely blameless. Something that seemed like a safe bet from the moment a character's flesh melts off their bones like well-braised short rib after being stepped on in the opening minutes. If there's a part of the human anatomy that you are sensitive to seeing injured on screen, guess what? Evil Dead Burn's got one hell of an effed up bingo card for you to fill out. So I'm giving Evil Dead Burn a 5. It is by far the most violent and oppressive Evil Dead movie yet. But even with Alice's struggles to move past her late husband as a sensible narrative hook, it has very little in the way to say with all of that sound and fury. Director Sébastien Vaniček scores the occasional visceral win as he sets the Deadites loose on a family already at its breaking point, but the series' signature sense of humor and the Kandarian history that serves as Evil Dead's backbone are woefully underdeployed, leaving Burns stuck between different modes of horror storytelling that have all been done better by this franchise in the past. Thank you so much for watching. For more movie reviews, check out what we thought of Supergirl and Toy Story 5. And as always, don't read out of the Necronomicon! It will always lead to Deadites messing with your day, and follow the IGN or whatever.